I want to do something a little bit different today. I am at the Zurich airport flying back to San Francisco. I spent about 3 weeks in Europe, and I just listened to one of my podcasts that I did last time I flew from this airport back to San Francisco. So I'm going a little bit back, about 3 months, and I'm trying to see where do I stand relative to those 3 months. Have I learned something? Have I changed my thinking? So I'm going to do a little bit more of that in the future because I think it's very important to keep track of one's progress or evolvement. Let's call it evolvement. It doesn't necessarily have to be progress in a positive way, but you do evolve as a person, hopefully in a good, positive way. And I want to talk about this a little bit. The concept I want to talk about is a podcast from July 11th, 2021, where I spoke about an interview with Fei Fei Li on the A16Z podcast. And Fei Fei Li spoke about intelligence. Excuse me, the airport announcer. So Fei Fei Li spoke about intelligence. She spoke about meta-learning. She spoke about one thing which stuck in my head, which is that in the experiments that she's doing, she has definitely learned one thing, which is that no matter what systems you create in terms of intelligence and evolvement, you find out that learning and intelligence converges towards a situation where you need less energy to learn in the future. So energy conservation is one of the driving forces in terms of intelligence. I want to talk about this a little bit, also within the context of David Deutsch and his ideas that the fine-tuning answer or the problem, the fine-tuning problem in physics, in fact, could be maybe answer to counterfactuals. I want to try to connect that because in the last 3 months, one of the things I did, I read Chiara Marletto's book, The Science of Kant and Kant, and I was thinking a lot about counterfactuals. This is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's September 29th, 2021. This is Krim-Delco. For the day, the fund is down 3.5%. The market is down 2.05%. For the year, we are now up 11.5%. The market is up 16.95%. We're underperforming at 5.45%. So let's first recap the podcast from July 11th and then kind of try to show where we see evolvement in our thinking. So Fei Fei Li's interview on A16Z, she spoke about some research she's doing. And in a nutshell, I refer people back to that podcast to talk a little bit more about where I talk a little bit in deeper. But what I want to summarize here is she's building intelligent systems that then hopefully have a way to evolve themselves. And then she kind of looks at what happens to those kinds of systems and how they evolve. And the one takeaway that she has is a meta-learning idea. And the meta-learning idea is that the less energy you need for future learnings, the more it sticks. So kind of if there is a cost function that intelligence is trying to optimize, it is use as little energy as possible for an amount of intelligence generated. Now, let's talk a little bit about how I think about intelligence, how I think about computation, how I combine counterfactuals and the latest ideas that I got from David Deutsch and Chiara Marletto within the context of Fei Fei Li's research, and then maybe also try to extrapolate to where we see AI going today and in the near future. So the way we think about intelligence is a way to extrapolate counterfactuals and find optimal ways to solve problems that are presented today. This is kind of what intelligence is. Computation is another way to talk about this because we consider computation being just the exploration of counterfactuals. And by exploring counterfactuals, we find better ways to solve problems again. So computation is a tool for intelligence. Intelligence is the ability to react to the environment and find solutions to problems. This is in general how we think about intelligence. And this is also why I mean, it's kind of now self-evident that how important computation is and why we think that computation going forward will be a lot more important also in the economy. Computation, the way I think about it, and this is, for example, one of the big questions that physics people always get asked is the universe just a big, massive computation? And the answer sometimes is yes and no, but who really cares? I think if we dig a little bit deeper, it does actually matter what the answer is. And the answer is yes, it is a massive computation because intelligence is computation. Intelligence can manifest itself in conscious intelligence like we have humans, and it can manifest itself in sort of biological intelligence where DNA gets formed and stored. And what is DNA? It's just another way to figure out counterfactuals to solve certain problems. And in fact, you can even go further back, and you can say that even when the atoms created themselves, and when we went from hydrogen to helium and all that stuff, it was just another way of intelligence towards exploring counterfactuals to get certain things done, whatever the problems were right after the Big Bang. I don't want to go there right now because it's certainly not my expertise. So let's stick with conscious intelligence, basically what we have today, humans. And let's think about it. So intelligence is really the exploration of counterfactuals with the help of computation and energy. And what Fei Fei Li is saying is that, well, the less energy you need for future learnings, the more that type of learning that you have today will stick. So what, in other words, she is implying here that energy consumption, or the amount of energy you need for something, is certainly at least a big part of that optimization function. To use my little example, I just spent 2 days in the Swiss Alps. I was hiking, one of my favorite things to do when I'm in Europe. And I always like this example. Why do you need energy to do computation? Well, let's think about it. What is computation? Computation is the exploration of counterfactuals. So let's say you ask yourself, okay, there are two valleys here. In one valley, there was an avalanche came down. The other valley, the avalanche didn't come down, and I want to set some seeds in the where the valley came down because I think it's better for my trees to grow there. Let's take a simple example. The question is, how do I find out in which valley the avalanche came down? Well, there's a memory. The valley itself serves as a memory because when the avalanche comes down, I will see a big pile of snow there. So, but how do I know which valley it is from far? Well, I have to go there. I have to actually check it out. And this is why I need energy to do exploring the counterfactuals. And it certainly doesn't feel like computation in a modern way, but in a sense, if you just replace computation with the word exploring counterfactuals, you get to the same result. I have to use energy. And what Fei Fei Li is saying is, if I can find better ways to find, maybe next time, how to find out where the avalanche came down, maybe I can find better ways. Maybe I can learn to solve the problem of solving the problem. So she's talking about meta-learning here. Now let's take our example in the Swiss Alps. So every winter I can go up there and figure out which valley did the avalanche come down. But maybe I can find better ways because maybe I can use less energy in the future. So maybe I can have some put a big rock in each valley, and if the avalanche comes down, well, the rocks would roll down into another valley where I am, so I don't have to go up there. So you see, I've figured out a way to learn with using less energy. And I think this particular example to me is it makes a lot of sense to think like that in terms of how intelligence is gathered in the world and how we humans gather intelligence. Is we are going towards systems that need less energy for future learnings. In other words, also, if you want to apply this really concretely as a hedge fund manager, look for companies that have systems in place where they can adaptively learn without using less resources to learn in the future. And this is one of the criteria I would put definitely to invest in a company. So if you have companies that have ways to take advantage of computational power in order to gain knowledge in the future with using less energy, so find maybe, that's why software companies are so successful, and also hardware companies that have maybe better hardware, all those things. Again, I'm in a meta level here, so I don't have concrete examples. Excuse me, I'm not saying you should concretely just invest, let's say, in NVIDIA because they developed CUDA, and CUDA helps you write software on GPUs, and GPUs use less energy to do a certain particular task in AI. This is certainly true, and this is why NVIDIA was so successful, but it doesn't mean that in the future this will be the case. Because again, we're at the meta level. So let's think more meta. Meta would be more, let's say, what I like about Netflix and the No Rules book, which is, that's more a meta way to learn, which is, okay, I have a human capital and how do I apply human capital most effectively to solve problems by having the keeper test. To me, that's a meta learning because I use less energy by keeping, let's say, senior vice president of media content in place for 10 years when maybe she is not adequate anymore. I replace her right away. That requires less energy for me to learn in the future what better media content I can provide. This just an example, and we're not invested in NVIDIA, by the way, but I think it's a good example. And of course, we're looking very sharply at companies like Tesla and our CRISPR index to see what actually they are doing in terms of this meta learning. So lastly, I want to talk about David Deutsch. David Deutsch, in one of the recent talks that I've seen, talks about the potential to explain the fine-tuning problem in physics through counterfactuals. And I think at least the way I understand this sort of from a big picture perspective is that what he's really saying is also a little bit what Fei Fei Li is saying. So counterfactuals are gathering intelligence. Counterfactuals are necessary, or the world is exposed to counterfactuals all the time. Basically, any kind of evolution, excuse me, any kind of development of intelligence, conscious or not conscious, always works through counterfactuals and therefore needs computation. And I guess what maybe Deutsch is alluding, and I would like to ask him that, but maybe what Deutsch is saying is that the fine-tuning problem, it can be answered by saying that, well, those fine-tuning characters were, or the fine-tuning factors, or the, whatever it is, the gravity constant and things like that, they really are, after exploring all the counterfactuals within the universe that we live in, these were the most optimal within the time frame that they were relevant, those factors. So for example, the gravity constant has been relevant ever since, is still relevant because we're still very much bound to gravity, but maybe in the future, if intelligence is digital or in a gaseous form, like in the black cloud, maybe the gravity constant will be not that important and it will lose its value. But right now, the counterfactuals and the iteration, the try and error, and the computation that the universe has been doing towards evolving has been optimizing for those types of fine-tuned parameters. So I'm just guessing here. It doesn't really, this is, I think it's a better explanation, but it's not a satisfactory explanation. Particularly, it doesn't necessarily allow me to instantiate any technology or products and services yet, but I think it's the right way to think about it. And I think lastly, I also want to say one more thing, and this is also within the context of the multiverse conversation, that we often say, let's say, okay, well, flying to Mars is so, is it likely or not likely? Well, the question is, if you follow David Deutsch's concept of everything is possible under the law, which is allowed by the laws of physics, then the answer is, well, okay, am I in the part of the multiverse where we can fly to Mars? And then you can say, well, how likely is, how many multiverses are there? Dozens of trillions, maybe, or even more. And they're getting more and more. And how many of those is it possible through computation and gathering of intelligence and the right meta-intelligence and meta-learning processes to go fly to Mars? And then you might find out that maybe there's the number of those possible universes is actually relatively high. So the probability that you're in the right universe that can fly to Mars is relatively high. So how does this all tie together? Okay, what does the multiverse have to do with computation, with intelligence, with Fei Fei Li's research, with the optimization of energy? Well, I think there is a nice line here, and that is that intelligence is the exploration of counterfactuals through computation. So it's just the next level of computation, which is we're doing computation to explore counterfactuals, and then we find certain useful results. That's what we call intelligence. The way we define useful is by minimizing the energy necessary to solve a certain problem. And now we can even look at it from a multiverse theory and say, look, the multiverses where certain things can happen are just those where we have been able to explore counterfactuals in a way that help us solve the problems that we're facing by using a bit less energy. So we have certain splits in the multiverse where maybe in one multiverse we're going towards finding a better solution, for my example, in the valley, and therefore that part of the branch of the multiverse goes much faster and gathers more intelligence faster than the other branch, which didn't figure out how to solve the valley problem other than just going up to the valley all the time and checking out. So this would be just a very simple example. We can go further. We have a multiverse where maybe CUDA wasn't evolved, and therefore we cannot have GPUs working and computer vision developing, and therefore we would have less maybe computer vision applications, or we could have a multiverse where CUDA wasn't developed, and therefore we have more ASICs developed and even faster development. Those are the kinds of things where we're looking at, again, from a meta-learning perspective, the question is, okay, what is the energy required to learn in the future? And I think that is a very, very powerful argument that Fei Fei Li made. And like I said, this is a bit of a new way of doing this podcast. I go back a few months ago and I see, where did I evolve? How did I evolve? I evolved by putting in the counterfactual thesis on top of this Fei Fei Li argument. And I think it just starts making more, it starts becoming a more coherent argument from my perspective. Thank you.